Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Several of you have, and almost everybody else has referenced the increase in cost, energy cost to Americans, and this is all about energy. And further down the chain, the increases affect virtually every product or service of every American. Example, I talked to some people in the cement manufacturing business, and they sit under the proposed EPA rules now if they're allowed to go into effect. In my state, half the manufacturer will close immediately, and the other half will be able to hang on for a year, long enough to get reestablished in Mexico. And I don't think there's any environmental protection regulations of significance in Mexico regulating cement and the manufacturing. And so, you know, unless you believe in such a thing as a no peeing section of a swimming pool, you know, we still get the pollution, we just pay 400% more for the product, you know. So I wondered if Mr. Yulee and Mr. Groves, you would express to us the bottom line of your thoughts about the UN climate negotiation. Do you think this is simply an attempt to transfer wealth, or do you see other more legitimate purposes?
Sure. Both Mr. Yulee and I were there in Paris during these negotiations, and we can tell you from firsthand experience that the big issue in Paris was money. I studied not just agreements like these, but other agreements that deal in wealth transfers from the global north to the global south, from the developed world to the developing world, and the Paris Agreement is no exception to the general trend in global UN agreements regarding global wealth transfer. And if it's enforced, that's essentially what will happen. Only the developed countries are required to pay into the Green Climate Fund, which is going to be $100 billion a year as a floor beginning in the year 2020. And all of those dollars go to the developed world, which is in the global south. So if that's not kind of a global wealth transfer, I'm not sure what is.
I would say there are mixed incentives in the talks. But I think what's interesting is what Christiana Figueres said. She's the Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And so my testimony, and I'll quote what she said, quote, "This is the first time in the history of mankind that we are setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution," end quote. So I think a lot of people see these talks as a way to change the economic development system. And I think that's something we should be concerned about, because the free enterprise system that we have has been responsible for the biggest boost in human health and welfare in history. And so I think we have to be cautious about where these talks go.
And I agree, and I hadn't intended to make this comment, but you know, we won the Second World War. The world is more free today because we had enabled industrialists to produce, and we outproduced the enemy. And here, I mean, I think most people have the common sense to understand that most of the rest of the world is in favor of us being less productive if it makes them more productive. But based on so much that we've seen in the governments that they're actually trying to help with our money here, do you think that's any probability that the funds would be properly used, or would we see more waste, fraud, and abuse like we have with many of the other resources we use to disperse Americans' wealth to other people?
I think certainly if Congress is going to be appropriating the money that goes into the fund, Congress should have a say in how it's spent. And there are rules that are being set up in the Green Climate Fund to oversee how the money is being spent. But, you know, I think the focus on the Green Climate Fund is a little bit misplaced because a lot of the money is not going to go through the Green Climate Fund. Even the Obama administration said we're not going to be sending $100 billion through the Green Climate Fund. That is just not going to happen. A lot of it's going to go through the World Bank. A lot of it's going to go through other development banks. Some of it will go through the Green Climate Fund. But it's going to become from the $100 billion that the developed countries have pledged to mobilize is going to be coming from a lot of different sources. And so that makes it a little bit more complicated to track actually who's providing the money and where it's going.
Yeah, there's just such a historical problem with corruption in those processes every time we get involved. I see my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Posey.